Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to see you all. We have a very exciting presentation here in a moment. So I'm very excited to introduce my colleague, Dr. Hamed Majid-Zada, or as students call him, Dr. Hamed. So Hamed joined the science faculty at Southern New Hampshire University in 2019. And before this, he served as a coastal environmental quality program specialist for the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium. And before that, he was a postdoctoral research associate at Clemson University, as well as a research assistant at Clemson and Auburn University. He earned his PhD in biogeochemistry from Auburn University in 2016. And his research focuses on the impacts of watershed disturbances such as urbanization, flooding, and wildland fires, and the impacts that these disturbances have on drinking water quality. So I'm sure he has a lot of very exciting things to tell us this evening. Thanks so much for making it. And I'm Katie Duryea. I'll be moderating the session, so feel free to use the chat in the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on that. And just a heads up that this session will be recorded. It's already being recorded. And also, if you choose to talk about this session on social media or anything like that, please use the hashtag SNHU Research 2021. All right, so welcome everybody. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and turn things over to Dr. Majid-Zada, who will tell us about environmental justice from the lens of two hurricanes.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it. Thank you for the kind introduction. Good afternoon. I'm so glad that I'm here with you today to talk about environmental justice from the lenses of two hurricanes. So the first question is, why hurricanes? Well, the main reason is that I'm an environmental scientist with a focus on water quality. And I never thought about environmental justice until 2016. It really took me two hurricanes to understand and notice environmental justice issues. So what are those two hurricanes? Well, at the beginning of 2015, Hurricane Joaquin resulted in intensive rainfall in coastal areas of South Carolina. More than 16 inches of rain in 5 days, which caused the largest flooding since 1928 in that area. Hurricane Matthew occurred almost exactly 1 year later. The amount of precipitation was lower than Hurricane Joaquin with 12 inches of rain, and it happened during 3 days. So the occurrence of two similar hurricane events at the same location and almost at the same time of year, October 2015 and October 2016, enable us to gain more insight into their impact on water quality and consequently for me into environmental justice. So let's see what was my research and how water quality really connects to environmental justice. So as Katie mentioned, my research is focused on impact of watershed disturbances, such as hurricanes, wildland fire, urbanization, and source and drinking water quality. So looking at a watershed, topsoil and vegetation are two main sources of dissolved organic matter, or DOM. And during rainfall events, including extreme rainfall events, part of this organic matter can be exported to the riverine system. And from riverine system, it can find its way into water treatment facilities, and from water treatment facilities to our home. In water treatment facilities, chlorine is added to water in order to disinfect the water, destroy the microbes, viruses, bacteria, etc. Now, this chlorine or oxidants that we use to disinfect the water may react with that DOM that's coming from the vegetation and the topsoil and form disinfection byproducts. So what about disinfection byproducts? Well, these DBPs can have negative impact on human health and been associated to diseases such as bladder cancer, rectal cancer, and adverse birth outcomes, of course, at high concentration. Now, disturbances such as hurricanes can alter both quantity and quality of DOM. So when we have an extreme rainfall event, quantity and quality of this dissolved organic matter that goes to water treatment facilities can change, and as a result, the quality and quantity of disinfection byproducts, which can have negative impacts on human health, can also change. And that was the case with these two hurricanes. In these two hurricanes, large amounts of carbon, in fact, years worth of carbon, exported into riverine system just in few days. 75 million kilograms of carbon exported during the 2015 event, which was almost equal to the amount of carbon that was exported in the whole previous water year. The export of carbon in 2016 event was even more than that, with 400 million kilograms of carbon exported just in few days. 400 million kilograms means 5 years worth of carbon exported just in few days. And that impacts the source and drinking water quality. So we studied the drinking water quality, and we find that the concentration of these disinfection byproducts have increased significantly for weeks after the hurricane. Chloroform is the most famous DBP. The concentration of chloroform increased by 115%. And two nitrogenous DBPs that in particular have significant impacts on human health and are carcinogenic, their concentration increased by 246 and 365%. So we tried to inform the public with seminar series and interviews with South Carolina public radio to increase awareness that, hey, for weeks after these hurricanes, the water may not be safe to drink. Look at this graph. This dashed line, this black line here shows the water flow. At this part, cities are flooded. The water in the streams and riverine system is at the highest level possible. But for weeks after that, the concentration, amount of carbon in the riverine system is increasing. So for weeks after hurricanes, days after the streets are cleared, the drinking water still may not be safe to drink. So we try to increase public awareness because we need outreach to activate the research. Think about this pandemic. You cannot just develop the vaccine. Just developing the vaccine does not prevent the disease. You need to come up with a distribution plan. In this example, research is like developing the vaccine. It's the science. Outreach is distributing the vaccine. So I started to visit some of the impacted neighborhoods weeks after the hurricane. And it was shocking that how low-income communities were impacted disproportionately. And it's not because rainfall events choose those low-income communities. It's because of the infrastructure, because of the adaptation strategies or lack of adaptation strategies in these low-income communities. This picture is from Georgetown, South Carolina, with a racial makeup of approximately 60% African Americans. Lovely, friendly people. Georgetown is the first city that I lived in when I moved to the United States, and it has a special place in my heart. I went back actually to Georgetown to get married, so I love this city. But it was heartbreaking to collect water samples from neighbors damaged significantly for the second time in 2 years. And it's not that we cannot do anything about it. We are not willing to spend more money in these neighborhoods. Wealthier, nearby communities were impacted less thanks to updated infrastructure. After all, South Carolina has more than 9,000 stormwater ponds. And it's not only flooding. There are issues regarding environmental contaminants, wastewater discharge, water quality, etc. In case of Georgetown, there is a paper mill in this city or town that makes all water quality related issues even more complicated. And there are issues regarding air quality, a bitter smell that you can feel it every single afternoon. Generally speaking, low-income minority communities are more likely than others to have chemical plants, hazardous waste facilities, and sewage treatment plants. although they may not even be aware of their exposure to increased levels of pollutants. I'm sure you have heard about the leak in a wastewater reservoir in Florida, which may impact a lot of people. Do you think people of that communities were aware of their exposure to these toxic wastewater? And even if they were, did they have the means to relocate? Could they just sell their home and move to another community or another neighbor or another city? Getting back to our topic, just look at the air quality in Georgetown. We have two maps here. The map on the right shows the population of people of color in Georgetown. As you can see, the population of people of color is significantly higher in downtown Georgetown, this area depicted in red. And on the left, you can see hazard index, which is associated with air quality. Again, the similarities between these two maps is shocking. The higher the population of people of color, the more exposure to this hazard index or low air quality. You can see at the downtown of the Georgetown, the air quality and exposure to hazardous compounds is significantly higher. So just by looking at this small community in Georgetown, South Carolina, it seems that low-income minority communities of color, are more likely than others to have chemical plants, sewage treatment plants, and outdated infrastructure that cannot handle extreme rainfall events. Extreme rainfall events are in particular important because it is predicted that frequency and intensity of hurricanes will increase due to climate change. And it's not limited to communities in South Carolina. The following year, our research group was dealing with a hurricane in Texas. And I observed a very similar story, and I read similar stories about the communities in Texas. Poor families were more concentrated in flood-prone parts of Houston and were more affected than wealthier ones. So look at these red dots here. These red dots here represent the maximum observed flooding because of Hurricane Harvey. And these sections shows how vulnerable those communities were. The darker areas are more vulnerable. And of course, the low-income parts of the city were affected more with Hurricane Harvey. So hurricanes and other environmental issues really hit everyone, but the poor have the hardest time. In fact, I want to invite you to look at your city, your community, your state, using EPA's environmental adjusting mapping and screening tool. It's open to public. It's super user-friendly website. You can go there, just enter a zip code or name of your city, and you can generate maps just like the maps I showed you. Unfortunately, when you work with this tool or similar tools, you come to a conclusion that you cannot deny environmental racism in the United States. Last night, I looked at Manchester, New Hampshire, where our campus is located. And again, you can see how low-income population have more exposure to hazardous waste. The map on the right shows low-income communities. The map on the left shows exposure to hazardous waste. This part of the city has highest population of low-income people. Look at the map on the left. The highest exposure to hazardous material is pretty much at the same location. Again, the similarities between these two maps is stunning. Or we can look at the air pollution. Just please look at these yellow dots that we observe in Connecticut. These yellow dots are representing plants emitting air pollution. It's not representing all the plants, all the factories in Connecticut. It represents plants that are emitting air pollutants. It means that there are other factories in Connecticut that use appropriate filters and are not emitting as much point source pollutants as these factories. And these shaded areas shows the population of minorities. And you can see these factories are much closer to areas with highest % population of minorities. And part of it is because of awareness in other communities, in other areas of the state. Because of the increased awareness, factories use more appropriate filters to prevent emission of point source pollutants. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation with a definition of environmental justice and a look to the future of environmental justice in the United States. Environmental justice is the right of every citizen to adequate protection from environmental hazards. And we cannot gain environmental justice by a presentation like this. This presentation is hardly a scientific research. This is a few examples about environmental injustice in the United States. 5 examples, 10 examples, 50 examples is not developing a holistic research. Not having access to updated data about environmental justice is shocking for me every single time. We need to have a holistic research about environmental justice issues in the United States. We need to have a holistic plan for climate change to see how climate change is going to impact low-income communities, considering the sea level rise, considering more frequent extreme rainfall events, how these extreme rainfall events are going to impact water treatment costs, and how low-income communities would be able to drink safe water during and after these hurricane events. With that, I would love to hear from you with any questions, or better than that, to see what do you think about environmental justice. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Hamed.
You're
It was
welcome.
a wonderful presentation. Feel free, anyone, to put questions either in the chat, or you should be able to use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen.
Sure.
Ooh, we have a question from Aaron Hamed. He says, thank you for a thoughtful presentation. Is there a causation/correlation between air quality, hazardous materials, and population densities for minority communities? For example, low-income communities tend to live in cities where hazardous materials are generated.
That's a great question. And it's one of the questions we always wonder about, right? Have people moved to these areas because of the low cost of, for example, housing, or these factories move to these communities because of lack of awareness? As I mentioned, there is a lack of holistic research about these data, but for example, in case of Connecticut, we know that some of these factories actually moved to these low-income communities, knowing that they would have received less pushback from those communities. Another thing that is shocking is that if they are in communities that awareness is a bit higher, they start to revise their behavior. They start using better filters to prevent emission of non-point source pollutants. What is more dangerous is the power dynamic. In a lot of cities and a lot of towns, let's think about Georgetown and that paper mill. The majority of people in that city work in that paper mill. So how would they receive a pushback from the people that work in that company? So it's not a huge town. A good portion of people or their family works in that factory. So they really prefer to close their eyes to that smell and air quality issue.
Oh, wow, very complicated issue. Wow. We have another question here in the chat. Are there countries that we can look to as models for establishing environmental justice here in the US?
The first answer is that I'm not the right person to answer that question. I don't know the answer, but that's a great question. One thing that I know is that a good portion of the environmental justice discussion actually started in the United States. The conversation started here, but if there are countries that are doing better than the United States, I'm not sure. I don't have any examples, so I'm not the right person to answer that question. Oh, but that's a great question.
Yeah. Another question, how did you measure the increased influx of organic compounds after the hurricanes?
Right, that's a great question. So that was one of the challenging tasks that we had. So we had to go collect water samples from areas that we previously installed water flow sensors. So we could have measured the water flow, and as a result, water volume. We measured the concentration of carbon and nitrogen and nutrients in the sample that we collected from those areas. In some areas, we had auto samplers, but in some areas, we had to collect the sample. So knowing the water volume and water flow rates and having the concentration of carbon and nitrogen, we could have measured. So we had a total of 60 sites in the city area to measure the influx of carbon and nitrogen and nutrients.
Oh, wow. So another question coming in. I've read that tree cover in cities corresponds to wealth. More money equals more trees, poorer areas equals fewer trees. I'm wondering if actively planting trees in poorer areas or cities would help filter and hold or uptake the floodwater and offer relief from heat and island effect.
That's a great question. So managing the stormwater runoff, or to better say, the sustainable stormwater runoff management as a multidisciplinary task. So it starts from residential areas with, yes, planting trees, with having rain barrels, with having the stormwater ponds if that area is as highly populated, and then goes to the infrastructure that we have. For example, in New England, the infrastructure is old. So in some communities, the infrastructure is 100 years old. So we have this CSO event, which is called combined sewer outflow. The infrastructure cannot handle that rainfall, and untreated water, untreated wastewater goes directly to our riverine systems, including Merrimack River. So yes, trees definitely play a role at residential community scale to prevent some of the surface runoff, but that it is one of the millions of strategies that we need to have for a sustainable stormwater runoff management.
And Hamed, just question for me. I'm curious, you showed the map of Manchester. Do you know what the hazardous waste exposure was that the EPA is referring to in that map?
Not yet. Actually, I checked that map yesterday. Looking at the environmental justice issues in New England is something new to me. Part of it is the CSO that we talked about. So currently, we are actually collecting water samples during and after those CSO events to see what kind of hazardous material goes into our riverine system. What are the levels of bacteria in our riverine system after those CSO events? So this is one of the things that we are studying, but not in particular yet. We don't know the answer yet.
Okay, wow, wonderful. Well, a couple more questions here. Is there data from the space station that would help assess the issue planet-wide? For example, air pollution is carried all over, so it's impacting other areas as well.
There are. NASA is monitoring air quality continuously. I remember I was in the class. The last time I was in the class before the spring break, there was these alerts about high levels of sulfur in China, which was showing that probably some kind of a living person or living material is being burned. I remember I told my students that, wow, this looks really weird. I hope that there's something off with this data. Wow. Or something really weird is happening in China. And that was my last lecture on campus. So yeah, definitely we can use satellite to monitor air quality. We are using satellite actually to measure the soil moisture, to monitor water quality. So there's a lot that we can do with remote sensing. I really hope our students pay more attention to these new technologies for sure.
Amazing. Yeah. Very. Oh, another one in the chat. I'm thinking of things like the COVID-19 Earth observation. Oh, this was maybe building on the last question. Yeah, I think you addressed it already. Wonderful.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Any other questions for?
So Karen is really right. I just wanted to add one more comment. They are doing amazing thing in the light of this pandemic. Like they monitor the wastewater in parts of the Europe to learn about spread of COVID-19 before cases even increase in the hospitals. So yeah, Karen is definitely right. There's a lot of amazing things that we can do with those kind of technologies.
Any other questions? A really wonderful discussion.
one of the things I really always wonder about is how climate change will change the environmental justice discussion. Some part of this country are going to receive significantly more rainfall. Some part of this country are not going to receive rainfall at all. Some part of country, which are not happy that they're going to receive more rainfall, are going to receive rainfall in the format of these extreme rainfall events. And that for sure is going to increase the cost of water treatment and will associate with a lot of environmental issues. I really hope that we can have can see some more projections about those issues.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. It seems like we're in a bad state already, and with climate change, things are only going to get worse. So
it's funny when I go to my class, I'm an optimistic person. I think that we have improved a lot. But when it comes to extreme poverty have declined more than 90% during the past few decades. We have improved a lot of issues in a lot of areas, but environmental justice is not really one of those areas that we have improved in. So that's kind of alarming.
Yeah, for sure. And you said the discussion actually started in the US, though. Do you think that's because there's more disparity here, or were there other things that led to that?
It's because you have great people in this country. I'm sure you have heard about this book, Silence of Birds, if I remember, it's called Rachel Carson book.
The Rachel Carson book, Silent Spring.
So that's one of the things that started the conversation, actually, right? So there was a time that they were spraying DDT into swimming pools, had a lot of impacts on the people and on the ecosystem, and it has tons of benefits for the industries. So the conversation about sustainable environmental management, sustainable watershed management, moral use of chemicals, really, I think, started from there and continued in a lot of areas.
Oh. Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned. It kind of dovetails with public health in some ways, like you were talking about earlier, because in some cases, it's still in areas they use insecticides to control the spread of malaria, right? So it's a very multi-pronged issue sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Ooh, we have another question in the chat. Are you optimistic that we will mitigate climate change by 2050?
No, 2050. I don't think our mitigation strategies can work by 2050. Really, first, there is not enough political will for that, and even if there was, we already have very high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There are technologies that, if they work, they can change the game. Really, for example, there is this 4 per thousand initiative that they talk if we can increase the soil carbon storage by only 0.4% globally, that can compensate all the carbon that we as humans emit to the atmosphere annually. So if that can work, yes, mitigation strategies can really change, or those technologies that are talking about injecting carbon dioxide to the ground. Those technologies and those initiatives are not cost effective now. So I think, in addition to mitigation strategy, we'll really have to focus on adaptation strategies. Like in a lot of cities, they are, like in Charleston, New Orleans, and a lot of coastal areas, they're thinking about water pumps similar to what we have in Netherlands. They are already building channels within the cities. So we need to come up with adoption strategies. Again, that has environmental justice issues. What if communities that do not have money as these cities who have tons of tourists coming every year? What about Georgetown? What about all the cities that do not have that much of money? So 2050, I wish.
Yeah, a little optimistic.
Yeah.
Ooh, we have another question. What is something we can do personally to promote environmental justice?
There's a lot that we can do, I think, at the personal level. I think social media is a powerful tool. There was a case in Pennsylvania that people could organize using social media and people could be heard using it, social media. It helps people really to organize first, and second, to increase awareness. So a lot of times the challenge that we have is lack of awareness. If we can increase the awareness, naturally people will act and react, and companies try to act accordingly. I think contribution to local institutions that are supporting environmental justice issues, using social media in a way that can increase awareness, and helping people to educate and increase awareness, I think can be one of the solutions.
That's wonderful. Are those birds at your place, Hamed?
What is that again?
Oh, I thought I heard birds chirping. Maybe I'm hearing.
Oh yeah, birds are always here. Yeah.
Speaking of silent spring, I guess
Yeah,
you don't have to worry about that there.
Yeah, it's good that we have the birds here. It's funny sometimes.
Any other questions? These are wonderful questions, everyone.
Absolutely.
Noisy spring. Ooh, a couple more coming in. How do these environmental justice efforts compare in the U.S. territories such as Puerto Rico? How can we support these communities from the mainland U.S.?
That's an interesting question. Puerto Rico is one of the areas that is impacted by hurricanes again and again and again. So that part I know that it has impacted the local industries and local businesses significantly. How we can support these communities from the mainland brings me back to the last slide that I have. We really do not have holistic research about environmental justice. What I did here, my presentation and similar studies that I read here and then are just a few examples. They do not prove anything. So if we can push for more holistic research, for more holistic information about environmental justice to see which part of the US are impacted most with environmental injustice, which industries are impacted the most with environmental injustice, who should pay for that environmental injustice. For example, if we assume, we don't have data yet 100%, that hurricanes are partially correlate with emission of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, who is emitting, within this country, I don't want to go international, who is emitting much of those greenhouse gases? Is it coming from Puerto Rico, or is it coming from more industrial part of the country? So we can tax. I'm not a big fan of taxation, but sometimes we have to do that.
Yeah.
Tax those companies, or like what similar to what Secretary Buttigieg is doing with infrastructure now. We have some taxation on mileage. The more you drive, the more you're going to pay in infrastructure taxes to update those infrastructure. So the more you emit as a state, as a city, as a community, greenhouse gases, you can pay more tax, and that money can be used to compensate the areas that are affected by hurricanes and environmental injustice issues. And definitely there are people who can address environmental justice issues in U.S. territories better than me. I only know about Puerto Rico and hurricanes, which is not that complete. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Ooh. Yep, we have some thank yous coming in the chat. It has been
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. This was really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This has been wonderful. And thank you, Hamed, for a wonderful talk.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it.